everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Recent extreme heat is reducing worker productivity, putting stress on regional power grids and disrupting business continuity. It is causing the deaths of livestock and affecting vegetable crop yields, leading to inflation. It is even said that the climate crisis is going to reduce worldwide GDP by more than 70% by 2100. The ultimate answer would be to deal with climate crisis, but what can be done now to minimize the economic impact? For an in-depth analysis, we invite Professor Kim Sei-wan from Ewha Womans University. Professor Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being with us. Now, we also have Mister Shouro Dasgupta, an economist at the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. Mr. Dasgupta is also visiting senior fellow at the Grantham Research Institute, London School of Economics and Political Science. Good to see you, Mr. Dasgupta.
Thank you for having me in the program. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure here, too. Now, Professor Kim, first question. Extreme heat and unsafe working conditions are causing workers to go out on strike, and UPS and Amazon workers have already reportedly staged industrial action asking for better working conditions. Now, could you tell us more about these walkouts?
Well, continuing heat waves in U.S. and Eurozone seriously worsen working conditions up to unbearable level, which leads to massive strikes of outdoor workers. As temperature goes above 37 degrees in Celsius, delivery workers in Amazon and UPS take strikes for better working conditions recently. The same is true for workers in Greece and Italy, outdoor workers. Italian construction workers demanded to work only after sunset in the evening. Actually, all workers in the whole world have their own right to pursue better working conditions. As the heat wave attack, almost all countries' workers strike, particularly outdoor workers who are directly exposed to danger of high temperature. This kind of strikes will be continued until September.
Right, I see. So they are going on strikes because of the unbearable working conditions. Now, Mr. Dasgupta, even if others do not take industrial action, many reports say, as our Professor Kim already pointed out, heat stress is very much linked to declining productivity, especially in construction and agriculture sectors where outdoor workers are exposed to extreme heat. Now, could you give us details on how productivity is reduced?
Yes, thank you for the question. As the esteemed professor already said, climate change is affecting the human right to safe and healthy working conditions, right? So heat stress results in increased risk of discomfort. It limits our physical functions and capabilities. It affects the way we work, the amount of effort we can put in, not just want to put in, but also ultimately it increases the risk of injuries and heat-related illnesses, such as heat cramps, heat exhaustion, and as we have seen in fatal cases, even death. In terms of productivity, heat stress or extreme heat reduces our performance during our working hours, right? When workers are under severe heat stress, they have to slow down and they have to take more breaks, especially as you mentioned in agriculture and construction sectors, to of course, rehydrate and cool down so that their health is not very adversely affected. Essentially, workers have to slow down to protect their health, which leads to declining productivity.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Kim, we are mainly discussing declining productivity in sectors such as agriculture and construction, but I heard that employees working in an air-conditioned environment could also be affected by extreme heat. Is it right?
That is true, Bo-kyung, because we can't stay indoor forever, and all businesses are highly intertwined, directly and indirectly in the end. The heat wave significantly increases all industry workers' death rate, and that also weakens all businesses' sustainability. Quite a few economic institutions are warning that economic damage generated by extremely strong heat increases quickly. For example, one of the major rating companies, Moody's, reports that this year's economic damage from the heat wave in the U.S. is expected to amount to $100 billion, or about 0.5% of total GDP. They further estimate that the economic damage from the heat wave rapidly increases up to over 2.3% of GDP until 2050. That altogether indicate the impact of heat wave is widespread over different industries with increasing damages.
Right. Well, we are going to tap on Moody's report on the impact on the GDP. But before that, Mr. Dasgupta, heat waves can put stress on regional power grids and driving up the coast and availability of space cooling as well. How does this affect business continuity?
This is a vicious cycle. Extreme heat has major consequences on our energy systems, whether it's regional or interregional and so on. During heat waves, demand for air conditioning increases significantly, which results in surge demand for electricity, which can result in increased greenhouse gas emissions. Again, makes the world hotter, and the vicious cycle continues, higher demand for cooling. Now, when demand increases, electricity prices increases as a consequence, right? But currently, with electricity prices already being elevated in many of the regions around the world due to the global energy crisis, businesses are facing higher operating costs, and which results in declining profits and, of course, affects their continuity. We have seen in many parts of the world that this has already become a reality. And the unfortunate issue is that this negative effects are only likely to become worse in terms of costs if air conditioners are not efficient, as we have seen in countries such as Bangladesh and India. So it's not just a human issue, it also has huge negative impacts on business operations.
Right, I see. It truly is a vicious cycle. Now, Professor Kim, continuing heat waves are also causing livestock deaths and affecting vegetable crop yields as well, prompting prices to skyrocket. How does that affect inflation?
Recent rise in the prices of meat, fisheries, and agricultural products quickly became the largest threat in stabilizing inflation because these are the key items that determine the general price level. As the heat wave dominate Korean Peninsula from last month, a great many livestock collapsed and died. Chickens are particularly vulnerable at the heat wave, so about 250,000 chickens collapsed over recent heat waves. That decreases supply and raises the price of the meats. Prices of vegetables and fruits also highly increased due to limited supply by the heat waves. For example, the cabbage price increased by 90% in a month, and other agricultural products prices are increasing together. And the problem is that barely stabilized inflation would be unstabilized due to the rising prices in the meat, fisheries, and agricultural products. Last month, domestic inflation was 2.3% on year, which is very close to central bank's inflation target of 2%. But thanks to price rise in meat and agricultural products, there will be a significant pressure on inflation by the end of the year.
Right, so climate crisis is affecting inflation as well. Now, it is also affecting the tourism industry. Now, Mr. Dasgupta, due to unprecedented weather anomalies, some parts of the globe that are heavily reliant on the tourism, such as Southern European countries, are reportedly experiencing a sharp increase in cancellations of flights and accommodation reservations. How is climate change also affecting the tourism industry?
It used to be the case that we always wanted to go to hot parts of the world during holidays, but it's just gotten too hot right now. And the tourism industry is highly vulnerable to climate change. As you mentioned, the data already suggests that an increasing number of tourists are adjusting their plans to not to face extreme heat. And this is the case in many Southern European and Mediterranean countries. They're changing their destinations or even delaying their trips. I live in Venice. It's always a hot spot for tourism in the summer months, but I do feel that there are fewer tourists maybe now due to the July heat waves already. And given the hotspot we are in, not just for tourism, but also for severe summer heat, next prediction of future heat waves are likely to be longer and more frequent and more intense. And given the pace and trajectory of climate change and climate change-induced heat waves, these shifts in tourism are likely to become more common in the future. And we will likely see the number of tourists declining in Southern European countries during the summer months. So they may switch during other months of the year. But the entire industry, from Rome to Paris to Venice, will become unstable, at least in the near term, with the heat waves.
Right. I mean, due to all of this impact that we have talked about up until now, Professor Kim, Washington-based think tank Atlantic Council estimated the total economic loss from heat in the U.S. to be at least $100 billion annually, a figure that will increase fivefold by 2050 if we don't reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. How serious is this figure?
As we talked about before, the economic damage of $100 billion generated by heat wave is about 0.5% of U.S. GDP, given that U.S. GDP is about $22 trillion as of 2022. So some might say that this economic loss is not much compared to the seriousness of heat wave and the size of the U.S. economy. It shouldn't be interpreted like that, because even though the economic loss by the heat wave is focused on several outdoor sectors like construction and delivery, the impact is really widespread in the end. For example, if the delivery business are stopped by the heat wave, that dismantles the fundamental flows of goods and services in the whole economy. And that finally gives a huge impact on the whole economy. And as the heat wave continues, this economic damage will be accumulated over different sectors of economy, which could be uncontrollable shock to the whole economy in the end.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Dasgupta, it is not just the U.S. we're talking about here. Moody's Analytics estimated that the chronic physical risk from heat stress could reduce worldwide GDP by up to 17.6% by 2100, as our Professor Kim has been keep talking about. What did you make of this forecast?
Professor Kim already put this very succinctly. I'll expand only a little bit here. So climate risks affect the economy through a variety of channels. The transmission channels are rather broad right now, right? And in the U.S., it might be easier to estimate some of the damages. But if we think of it, extreme heat leads to chronic changes in living conditions affecting our health. We've already talked about labor productivity, agriculture, ecosystems, sea level rise. So there are both damages to the flow, but also stock, let's say, of human capital and for physical capital. And in low and middle income countries, these damages might be lower in terms of monetary damages, but the health and the well-being damages are likely to be much higher. And without strong mitigation efforts, these damages will continue to increase multifold, as the esteemed professor already mentioned. So we need to think about how cumulative these damages will be in low and middle income countries in terms of health and well-being, and not just monetary losses.
Right, I see. Mr. Dasgupta, one more question. Now, though the best solution would be tackling climate change itself, let's focus on what countries can do first. Now, to protect workers from extreme heat, the Biden administration announced in 2021 that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration would issue relevant regulations, but no draft has been released so far. What kind of regulations generally should be put in place?
So, as I said in the beginning, climate change is affecting human rights of workers, right? In many parts of the world, workers in the sectors that we've already discussed, agriculture and construction, are at increasing risk from heat waves. Yet, as you just mentioned, even in US, we do not have sufficient health and safety protections. And even where we have such protections for labor, to protect the labor force, enforcement is often weak. Even in high-income countries such as the UK, we do not have a maximum temperature threshold to protect the workers. So in the short run, we can have, let's say, early warning systems to ensure that meteorological information is used for decision-making. So if it's too hot to work outside, let's put a moratorium on workers not working during the most high-risk working hours, especially during heat waves, right, that we have already mentioned. Workers might have to take additional breaks when they work. They might have to change what they wear and increase their rehydration. But as we have seen over history, this must be mandated by the government. This cannot be left to the free markets. We might also need regulations for changing working hours, providing access to cooling indoors, but also in the medium term, adjusting building designs, climate-smart urban planning, and increasing mechanization of some tasks. To end, what we need is proactive labor protection policies that take into account local contexts and not just one-size-fits-all type policies that do not help us at all. So it's now about protecting rights of workers to safe and healthy working conditions that are required in all parts of the world.
Right. There seems to be many steps that we need to take to protect our workers. Now, Professor Kim, this question just popped in my mind. How is a situation in South Korea? And I believe the business sector would be quite reluctant to, better the working environment for workers because that all means money, right? How should this be dealt with?
Well, as Dr. Dasgupta pointed out, we do not have clear condition over the heat waves for all the workers. So we can see that quite a few outdoor workers in South Korea are suffering from really massive heat waves under construction and deliveries and so on. So it is very necessary to provide the standard working conditions under heat wave, which should be given exactly by Korean government and Congress.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Kim, not just for workers, there also needs to be a contingency plan in case climate crisis bring weather anomalies other than heat waves. What plans need to be made?
It is almost true that we will have a constant heat wave and weather anomalies until excessive carbon dioxide emission problem is fixed. Until then, we do have to have a different level of preparation for the weather anomalies like heat waves and floods. For that purpose, government should redesign all infrastructures in different standards of temperature and rainfall. For example, in constructing an airport, this intensified standard to avoid heat wave and flood damage should be applied. And all nationwide key infrastructures are needed to be updated quickly. It is a big and expensive project, but a necessary step to keep people in a safe environment.
Right. We need to totally redesign the whole system. Now, Mr. Dasgupta, some experts say that governments should make efforts to convert the climate crisis into opportunities for so-called climate finance, enabling businesses to invest in new tech and industries and creating jobs. How should this be done?
Oh, absolutely. Completely agree with you. And boosting climate financing, especially for the private sector, is going to be key. It is going to be essential. And ensuring innovative financial access to innovative financial instruments can provide such incentives and opportunities, as you already mentioned. And enabling access to climate finance can speed up investments in sustainable and clean energy projects, among many other green projects. But what governments across the world needs to do is help the private sector to get access to such funds. This is going to be a major boost, not just to tackle climate change, not just to tackle greenhouse gas emissions, but also to spur investment in green projects, in sustainable energy projects, and create many jobs. There will be millions of jobs that will be created in the green sectors. This is a win-win opportunity, reduces negative impacts of climate change, and improves economic conditions around the world. Now, governments can provide incentives, but at the same time, there needs to be regulations in place that strongly encourages businesses and private sector in general to invest in green projects, which will enable them to get access to further climate financing, but they must move away from polluting activities. This is absolutely necessary.
Right, I see. Mr. Dasgupta, one more question. Would there be any examples that enabled for the business sectors, private sectors, to be encouraged?
The Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S. is a perfect example. It has already sparked investments, billions of dollars of investments, created hundreds of thousands of jobs. And the Biden administration stepped in and said, well, you'll get incentives to invest in green projects, but you have to stop your involvement in some of the more polluting activities. That's a perfect example, I would say.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Kim, what's your view on this? How should the climate crisis convert it into climate finance?
Well, all major countries have already decided to participate in decreasing carbon dioxide to control the weather ultimately. And Korean government also is implementing a plan that decreases carbon dioxide emission by 40% until 2030. In implementing this policy, I think it is very important to construct an efficient partnership between public and private sectors. And particularly, government should provide financial resources to private sectors' development of clean energy-based technologies. Without developing this ecosystem between public sector and private sector and finance and manufacturing sectors, it would not be possible to have a new opportunities with, business opportunities with clean energies.
All right, I see. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Well, thank you, Professor Kim and Mr. Dasgupta, for your time and your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.